For the land's sake, what'll Maria do now?" "That's just what Hiram said. What'll Maria do now? It ain't as if she's had folks belonging to her, and now the house is burnt, and Hannah's as she is. It does seem as if Maria'd find it hard getting on alone and doing her own thinking." "There wa'n't nothing saved, I s'pose?" "Next door to nothing, one wash-tub, I believe, and the old gray horse that was out to pasture. That's about all. I did hear, though, something about the men folks having saved a blue-chintz Sophie. 'Twas the only thing they could get out of the house before the roof fell in. They couldn't seem to get a holt of anything else. 'Twas so hot, and the old house burnt like tinder. Hannah says she was that scared she seemed dazed, and this morning Miss Fife, she that married Ben Fife down on the Edge farm at the foot of the hill, they took him in and did for him. And when Lucindy Fife went to call him to breakfast at 5 o'clock, there was Maria crying like a baby, and Hannah lying like an image with her eyes staring wide open. She must have had a shock in the night." "For the land's sake," said the other woman again. "Yes, and Miss Fife, she tried to get Maria to eat something, but she wouldn't eat a thing. She just sat and cried. You know, she was always sort of a shadow to Hannah, and now she's just like a baby." "I declare, I believe I'll go up to Miss Fife's. I hate to lose the time. I ought to stir butter today, but just as likely as not, lots of folks will drop in, and I sort of want to hear it all firsthand." "I believe you're right, and if you'll sit a while, I'll hurry up these doughnuts and be ready in no time. It's a sort of lonesome walk up there." The Widder Luke turned the light side of a doughnut under. The fat sizzled, and Jane Peebles said, "Did you hear what Sophie 'twas they saved?" "I don't rightly know which one 'twas. Miss Culver said it was the blue chintz one, but I don't recollect as they had no blue Sophie. I don't seem to know exactly what they did have. Hannah never was just the same to me after we had that tiff over the raspberry jam she and I made for the church sale. But I ain't going to bring that up agin her. Now she's laid low, I shall go up there just the same in their time of trouble." "I s'pose the Sophie must have been a new one, or they wouldn't have been so keen to save it." "I guess 'twas. Seems as if these doughnuts wouldn't ever brown. It's always so when you're in a hurry." "I guess I'll ask Maria about that Sophie," said Jane. "It's likely that she'll tell all she knows when she gets used to the situation. I always thought Maria was a sight nicer than she seemed. I know once she came near telling me how they made that soft soap, that special kind, you know, so white, and it keeps like gel, year after year. 'Twas at a sewing bee, and Maria, she warmed up and was just going to tell me when Hannah, she came in, and Maria, she shut up quick as anything. It was sort of curious how she knuckled down to Hannah. Did you ever think Hannah was sort of set?" added Jane in a low, mysterious tone. "Hannah set? She was soldered in a meeting house, and you know it, Jane Peebles, for all you sided with her about that raspberry jam." Widder Luke's eyes flashed as she lifted the kettle of hot fat. She got in a good stroke on an old score, and Jane did not dare to retort. Soon after 12, she and Jane Peebles were walking through the lane towards the Fifes. There was a Sunday air about their dresses, but a Monday decision in their faces. The reporting in hill towns is done mostly by such volunteers, and one must get up early for the first news. Widder Luke carried a plate of doughnuts as a neighborly tribute to the occasion. At the corners, the women paused a moment. They could see from where they stood the black skeleton of the burned barn silhouetted against the sky beyond Huckleberry Hill. Just then, Cy Briggs came along in his spring wagon with two strange ladies on the back seat. They took the right-hand road that led to the old Keyes place, and as they passed, Mr. Briggs drew his reins with an "Osh-shush-shush" to his horse. "Won't you get in and ride up the hill?" Widder Luke and Miss Peebles decorously hesitated a moment and then climbed over the wheel and sat on either side of Mr. Briggs, who settled himself leisurely between the two women with neighborly familiarity. Then, pointing backwards with the butt end of his whip to indicate and introduce his passengers, he said, "These ladies were pretty well disappointed to find the Keyes house burnt up. They come all the way from— Where'd you say 'twas you come from?" "We came from the Adirondacks," said Rita. "We want to call on Miss Hannah and Maria, and if possible to get a sketch of the house to paint a picture of it." "You don't say so. Well, I declare for it, it's too bad," said the Widder Luke. "But there's sights of houses older than that one you might paint. There's the Fife house, where they're stopping now. That's as old again and more tumble down, if that's what you want. read a piece in the Greentown Gazette about artists. It said they always took the worst-looking houses to paint, though it does seem queer to me. Did you know the Keyes house very well, and can you tell us how the rooms were built?
Why, certain, said Mr. Briggs. I've been in it 100 times if I have once.
Rita and Nan bent forward to listen. The horse jogged slowly up the hill, Mr. Briggs flicking his whip from side to side to encourage the steady walk.
There was a hall a-running right through the middle, from front to back. An awful waste of space, to my thinking. When my brother Joel built his house, he sought out to have just such a hall, and I said to him, says I, while you're about it, why don't you build a house, or else build a hall and let it out for dancing? Joel was dead set again dancing, and it kind of stuck in his mind. So we built his'n without any hall. You just step right out of doors into the setting room. It's nice in summer, but a little cold in the winter.
Yes, I should think it might be. What were the other rooms in the Keyes house?
Well, there was the family setting room on the right-hand side of the hall, and back of that the bedroom for the old folks. Hannah, she's slept there for some years now, on the north side. There was the keeping room, and back of that the dining room. Though I'll be blessed if I know why it wasn't a kitchen. That is, if a kitchen's where folks cook. Them Keyeses, way back to Jonathan Keyes, was always folks for high-flying names, especially Hannah.
Was that all the rooms there were in the lower part?
Pretty much all, except a shed they used for a kitchen in old times.
Wasn't there a little room between the front and back rooms on the north side? Asked Nan, a little hesitatingly, while Rita gave her a pinch of excitement.
I don't know as there was, said Mr. Briggs.
Jane Peebles spoke up. I believe there was some sort of a room there. I remember once Maria said she kept that north door a little crack open in fly time, and it did seem to rid the little room of flies considerable.
I don't recollect, said Mr. Briggs, as there was a door on the north side, but I ain't sure. Them pine trees were so dark and the rose bushes so thick I can't remember, as I've been round there lately. It didn't seem any special place to go.
Well, said Jane Peebles decisively, I guess there ain't nobody in Titusville that knows any more about that house than I do, unless it's the Keyeses themselves, and I know there was a little room.
Now, Jane, said Widder Luke.
Jane wilted a little. If there was a little room there, where was the door to it? On the inside, I mean. I guess I haven't been to the Baptist sewing circle for 40 years for nothing, and the Keyeses have had it once every year, in January, and I venture to say I've sat and sewed in that front room scores of times. And the only door in the front room was the door into the china closet, except, of course, the door into the hallway, and as to the dining room, as they call it. Cy Briggs was a widower, and this was a subtle compliment to him. There wa'n't no door at all on that side of the room, just blank wall with them black pictures of the family done in ink under glass. I always was struck with that one of Jonathan Keyes. It did look exactly like Hannah. Just so set and stubborn about the mouth. Poor Hannah, she has had her day, though. I have often heard my mother say that Hannah was the prettiest girl in Titusville. When she was 16, though, she was always that stiff. She was 16 just before she went down to Salem. Here was an opening, and Nan plunged in. I heard something about that. Didn't she meet an old sea captain down there and come near marrying him? I don't know how near she came to marrying him. I know he never came to Titusville. Now I wonder how you ever came to hear that old story. Seems 100 years ago since my mother told me.
Here we be, called out Mr. Briggs as he stopped his horse with the soothing down east. Osh, osh, osh. Beyond them, yawning the black pit where the cellar of the Keyes house had been, the ashes still guarded the mystery of the little room.
My, but don't it look mournful,
ejaculated Widder Luke.
And then she continued, My mother said 'twas rumored round Titusville that Hannah had caught a beau down to Salem. Course that made a stir, and the folks wanted to know all the particulars, but all they could find out by hook or by crook was that 'twas a sea captain, and that he was after his third wife, having buried his two others, and that he had asked Hannah to marry him. He gave her lots of heathenish stuff that he had brought from India for his first wife. They couldn't seem to find out much more than that. When suddenly Hannah came home without any warning, she brought an extra trunk back with her, but she did look dreadful peaked. She was sort of pale, and her eyes had a look just like her grandfather Keyes. She hadn't never looked like any of the Keyeses before. She didn't let on that anything had happened, and she went everywhere just the same, and nobody knew what she had brought home in that extra trunk, till one day when the family had all gone to meeting, Nancy Stack, she was Hannah's mother's sister, she went and peeked in the trunk, and She saw a lot of trash, sea-cells and queer sorts of calico. But just as she went to lift the tray to see what else there was, she heard the folks coming, so she shut up quicker than lightning. 'Twas a snap-lock, and her apron got caught. She couldn't take time to open it, so she just tore off a piece of the hem to get away, meaning to go and get the scrap out some other time. But Hannah must have been in the habit of going to that trunk, and before night she found the checked gingham caught in the lid, and Nancy Stark, she left very sudden that afternoon and didn't never set foot in the house again. It's queer how it all comes back to me. I suppose it's seeing the house gone and knowing how Hannah was took last night."
"Oh, do tell us more," said Rita breathlessly. "We know Mrs. Grant, their niece, and it is all so interesting."
"Well, folks is generally interested in what they are interested in, but I don't know that there's much more to tell. The captain, he never turned up to get his third wife. Nancy Stark, she died, and Hannah and Maria here always lived up there alone since the old folks died, and a pretty lonesome spot it was, to be sure."
"Did anybody ever dare to ask Miss Hannah about the captain?"
"No, I guess not. Folks up here mind their own business pretty much."
There was a silence after this rebuke, but Nan, who always began to hold on when other people let go, said,
"I heard once that they had some beautiful china in the china closet, some that had belonged to their grandmother."
Nobody volunteered any remark about this. Mr. Briggs had got out and was poking around with a stick in the ashes. Nan persisted.
"Did you ever see the china?"
"I did,"
said Jane Peebles.
"Lots of times."
"What kind was it?"
"Oh, just blue willow pattern, but there was sights of it."
"Then they didn't have any other kind, white with a gilt edge, for instance?"
"Well, up here, blue willow, if it's the real old kind, is considered good enough for most folks." "Why, of course, I only wish I had any half so nice,"
said Rita politely.
"Be you a chany collector?" asked Widder Luke with a defiant note.
"Not at all, oh no, but I do wish we could find out whether they ever did have a gilt-edged set."
"Sakes alive, if you really want to know particular, I shouldn't make any bones myself about asking Maria. I should like her to know I don't bear any grudge against 'em, though we did have a falling out about that jam, Hannah and me, come 10 years ago next August. I shouldn't mind showing I had friendly interest in them. Now they're in trouble."
The ruins of the old house looked small and insignificant in the broad sunshine. The poplars were shriveled by the fire, and the thicket of roses was blackened and trampled. It was as dehumanized as if no one had lived there for a century. Mr. Briggs came back to the wagon and said briskly,
"Well, where'll you go next?"
Rita and Nan hesitated, then Rita said,
"Do you suppose Miss Maria would like to see us? We met her niece just before she sailed for Europe. She asked us to call and give her aunt some messages, but if you think they are too much broken down by the fire and all—"
"Oh, no, it'll do Maria good. It's no use crying over spilt milk, or burnt houses, for that matter. I guess you could look at Hannah, too. She can't speak, I hear it said, but she lies right in the bed off of the living room, and most everybody goes in to look at her."
"The theater is nowhere,"
whispered Nan to Rita.
"But isn't it ghastly?"
Miss Maria sat in state in the front room at the Fifes. Her black dress, borrowed from a neighbor, was large for even her plump figure, and it had a tendency to make her look as if she had been ill for a long time and had grown thin. Her face was pale with the recent excitement and wore the air of one who was waiting. She sat quite erect in the rocking chair with her plump hands folded on her lap. There was an appealing look in her eyes. She missed Hannah. There was no one to give her a pattern for thought or act. Neighbors passed in and out, and there was something so passive in Maria's look that they talked of her freely, as if she were not there. There was plenty of sympathy for her, but it was swept out of sight by the tide of curiosity and detail. How the house had caught fire, who had seen it first, how Hannah slept so heavily she could not be roused for a long time, how it happened that the well was so low, how the pump handle broke, how the men tried to save something, but how little had been got out, and then how bad Hannah looks, and how old Simeon Bissell lived 10 years after his stroke. And Hannah was younger than he, and the Keyses were a long-lived family. They passed in and out of Hannah's room, Lucinda Fife asking each newcomer to just step in and look at Hannah. Borne along by their sympathy and curiosity, Rita and Nan went in and looked on poor Hannah, stiff and uncompromising as of old, lying in her unwanted bed. She eyed them with her impenetrable gray gaze,
and it was evident that the mystery of the little room would never be revealed by her, even if one could be bold enough to storm that granite citadel. They talked with Maria. She heard the messages from her niece in gentle silence. Rita took her passive hand and tried to tell her how they sympathized with her in her troubles, and to explain how it was they had happened to come at this time. But it evidently did not get below the surface of Maria's consciousness. She seemed most taken with Nan, however, and to like to have her near her. Just before they left her, Rita ventured to ask if any of their gilt-edged china was saved.
"No, I guess not," said Maria.
"Did they save the blue chintz sofa?" impetuously asked Nan.
"No, I didn't hear as they did."
"You did have a gilt-edged china set, didn't you?" said Nan.
"And a blue sofa," persuaded Rita. "I don't seem to remember anything much," said Maria with an appealing glance towards the room where Hannah lay. It would be barbarity to press her further just then. Rita and Nan went away, not to the Adirondacks, however, but to spend a few days with Jane Peebles, who gladly acceded to their petition to be boarded there for a time.
"Miss Peebles, where is that man, Hiram, who always lived at the Keys?" asked Rita, as Jane helped them to applesauce and gingerbread at supper.
"Hiram? I guess he's pretty well tuckered out, what with the fire and had a stroke. He come over here this morning and wanted a piece of my huckleberry pie. He said he couldn't seem to relish any other food. He always did set a great store by my pie. It wasn't any better than what Hannah made so far as I could see, but he always lotted on having the corner piece when he brought me eggs from the farm."
Miss Jane's secret was not so hard to discover, as was the secret of the little room.
"I would like to talk with Hiram," said Nan.
"Oh, Hiram, he'll talk till doomsday once you set him going, and say pretty smart things, too, for a man."
"Hiram, can't you tell us something about the old house?"
asked Nan the next morning, as Hiram rose from the kitchen table where he had been taking the solace of a corner piece of Jane's huckleberry pie. "That depends," said Hiram, "upon what you want to know. I suppose I can tell as much as anybody."
"What we really want to know," said Rita candidly, "is whether there was a closet or a little room on the north side of the Keys house, between the front and back rooms."
Hiram rubbed his ear carefully and began in a judicial way. "When Jonathan Keys first built that house, sometime way back in 1700, he planned to have—"
Jane Peebles, you're wanted right off up to the Fifes, and Hiram, too. Hannah, she's took worse, and Maria, she's no more than a babe unborn. I'm on my way up there now," concluded the Widder Luke as she hurried up the hill. When Rita and Nan went to say goodbye to Maria a few days later, Maria clung to them. She had begun to like these new friends who had taken it upon themselves to try and do for her what Mrs. Grant would have done had she been there. She followed them to the door and said in a whisper,
"I asked Hannah only the day before her last shock whether she did have any gilt-edged china, and she sort of nodded. Then I asked her if we had a blue sofy, and she nodded again. But come to think it over by myself, I don't think it really meant anything, because, you know, if Hannah couldn't do anything else but nod after she had that first stroke, she couldn't shake her head. But I thought I would tell you. You've been so kind, and you seem so interested."
Out on the stone wall at the corners, Nan and Rita sat and laughed and cried. The tragedy and the comedy appealed to them, and not even when Nan said, as they walked down to Jane Peebles' house,
"All the same, I saw the little room,"
and Rita said,
"I saw the china closet,"
did they feel any bitterness.
"Goodbye,"
said Hiram.
"I'm real glad you came, and I want to tell Miss Grant, when you write to her, that Hiram, she'll remember Hiram fast enough, Hiram's going to marry Jane Peebles, and that Maria shan't never want for a home so long as Jane can make huckleberry pies."
"Oh, we are so glad, and you will send us a piece of wedding cake, won't you?"
"I shouldn't wonder," said Hiram.
"Won't you please tell us what you started to that time when Miss Hannah was taken worse so suddenly? We do so want to know whether there was a room or a china closet there on the north side."
"I do remember now that I started in to tell you that. It wasn't much anyhow, only when their grandfather Keys built the house, he boasted that he intended to build the entire house of timber that hadn't a knot in it. He spent 10 years a getting the timber ready, and when it was done, he found that right in the front room closet they'd put a piece of board with a great knot in it. He was dreadful mad, but he kept it there all the same.
on purpose," he said, "to show folks that one no use to set out to do anything perfect in this world."
Then there was a china closet?
"Well, yes, there certainly was a closet there."
"Oh, Nan,"
said Rita, as the cars moved away from where Hiram stood.
"He didn't say exactly what kind of a closet even then." "No, but we can write to Jane and ask her to answer our questions with just yes or no. When she is Mrs. Hiram, I wonder if he even has a last name, she will get it out of him if we can only interest her."
"Jane," said Hiram that evening, "if you could manage to wash on Saturday so as to have an off day on Monday, I don't know, but we might as well be married then as any other time. I should feel sort of easier in my mind if Maria came down to live with us before they think her room is better than the company up the Fifes, if Hannah should die."
"That's so, Hiram. I'll hurry round and fix things, and you better stop tonight and tell Maria that I'll be real glad to have her come and live with us. And Hiram, I've been thinking that if the men folks did save that blue chintz Sophie—"
"Wait a minute, Jane. I sort of want to tell you something. 'Tain't anything I should want you to repeat, but it's something that sort of troubles me some. You see, Miss Hannah, she's always been good to me, and I shouldn't want to say anything to set folks a-talking. But Miss Hannah ain't exactly been well for some weeks, and only the day before the fire she came to me, and she said she thought 'twas about time she put that old trunk full of duds, the one she's always kept in a closet, out of the way, and she guessed she'd have me burn it up. I thought 'twas mostly a pity to destroy the trunk. It was a real good one, and hadn't never seen no travel to speak of. And so I said I'd take the things out and burn 'em. That seemed to trouble her, and she was real short with me. She said I was no better than all the other folks, that I was prying round to see what she kept in it. I sort of soothed her, and then she said she'd pestered most to death by folks always asking about some old blue chintz and about a little room, and she guessed if she could put that trunk out of sight, maybe folks would mind their own business and let her have some peace. So when Maria was out to the garden for some stuff for dinner, Miss Hannah, she got me to help her carry the trunk out of her room and put it in the hall closet. It wa'n't no kind of place to keep it, but I thought it was better to humor her mite, seeing she was out of sorts. In the middle of the night," continued Hiram, dropping his voice and looking round to see that nobody was coming up the walk, "in the middle of the night, I smelt smoke and thought right off that the barn must be a-burning, but I couldn't see no light. Then I heard a sort of smothered noise, and I suspicioned right off what was the matter. I run to Maria's room and found her stumbling round in the dark. Her room being full of smoke, she was sort of confused, and there was a terrible glare out in the hall. We found Miss Hannah out there, wringing her hands and calling out, 'Oh, the trunk'll be burned up, the trunk'll be burned up.' We couldn't coax her to go away, and it did seem as she'd burn up in her tracks if I hadn't just took her and carried her out. By that time the house was all a-blazing, and though the folks began to come, it wasn't no use, it had to go. Hannah, she was all dressed, and I don't believe she had been to bed." "You don't think she set the house afire, Hiram?" "No, not a-meaning to, but what I think is that she felt lonesome without the trunk, and so she went down to the hall closet when she thought we was asleep, and either she dropped a candle or else the things that hung in the closet caught fire, and she didn't see it till 'twas too late, and she was so fearful that the trunk would burn she wouldn't go away."
"What was in the trunk?"
Hiram shuffled from one foot to the other, then hesitated a little, and said, "Jane, I've been coming to see you a good many years, most ever since we was young, and yet we hain't never exactly spoke of getting married till lately. But they ain't so slow down in the city, and I guess Hannah sort of expected to get married to that sea captain down to Salem. Anyways, whatever she kept in that trunk, it came from Salem, and I guess 'twas some stuff he gave her."
"You don't say so, all these years."
In Paris, Mrs. Grant with her husband sat over the breakfast coffee in their little parlor in the Hotel Saint-Romain. The window opened on the balcony overhanging the Rue Saint-Roch. From the narrow street below floated the cry, "Les moules, les moules," mingled with the clap of the horses' hooves on the asphalt below. The concierge sang as he swept the sidewalk before the door, and the newsboys cried, with their plaintive intonation, "Le Figaro, le Figaro, le petit journal."
"Roger," said Mrs. Grant, "I had such a curious dream last night. I suppose I must have been asleep, but I seemed to be awake, when suddenly I saw Aunt Hannah standing at the foot of my bed just between the two posts. She stood quite still, and her eyes were fixed on me with her peculiar expression of reserve, but also as if she had an intense desire to speak. I was just going to cry out, "Why, Aunt Hannah, is that you?" when suddenly I felt very passive, and, as if a change was going on, the curtains of my bed moved back slowly, and I was again in that mysterious little room. I seemed to see either myself or my mother. I could not tell which it was, as a little girl lying on the sofa. It was that same blue chintz sofa I told you about. Everything in the room was exactly as I remembered seeing it when I was a child, even to the shell and the book on the shelf. I can't express to you how it was that I saw the little girl lying there. It was as if my mind was compelled by some other mind to see the little girl in the little room. And all the time I did not know whether it was my mother or myself as a child that I was looking at, and I could feel all the time my Aunt Hannah's gray eyes, though I could not see her while the vision of the little room lasted. It was some minutes before the scene began to fade, and it did so very gradually, just as it came. First, the roses and blue morning glories on the paper began to waver and grow indistinct. Then one object after another trembled and faded. It was exactly as if something outside of myself compelled me to see these things, and then as the pressure of that other will was removed, the impression gradually disappeared. The last to go was the figure of the little girl, but she too faded. The bed curtains seemed to evolve out of the walls of the room, and I was lying on my bed, but Aunt Hannah still stood between the foot-posts with her eyes fixed on mine. Then came the impression that she could not speak, but that she wanted to convey some thought to me, and then these words came to me, not as if a voice spoke them, but as if they were being printed on my mind or consciousness. "Margaret, you must not worry any more about the little room. It has no connection with you or your mother, and it never had any. It all belongs to me. I'm sorry that my secret ever troubled anyone. I tried to get it to myself, but sometimes it would get out. There'll never be any little room to trouble anybody else any more." All the time I was hearing these words, I felt Aunt Hannah's eyes, and then she began to move backward, slowly, and she seemed to vanish down a long, long distance, till I lost sight of her. The last thing I saw was her gray eyes fastened on my face. I awoke and found myself sitting up, with my head bent forward, looking right between the foot-posts of the bed.
"Your Aunt Hannah seems to be more fond of traveling than she used to be. Paris is further from Titusville than Brooklyn," said Mr. Grant lightly.
"Oh, don't, Roger. Don't. I think Aunt Hannah must be dead."
End of